Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison. I want to welcome you to this session of Humanity Rising as we delve into one of the greatest mysteries of those of us who are living, and that is the phenomenon of aging and the certainty of dying. Before we enter that very deep and profound domain, I want to take a moment to honor someone who has been one of the foundational pillars of Humanity Rising, Stan Pokras. All of you know him. He's been day by day performing a service of extraordinary proportions as he has, keep your video on, Stan. We want people to see you and honor you. And we're coming, everyone, because Stan needs help. Every day, as you know, those of you who are in the after chat and many of you who are just on Humanity Rising, he records the after chat in his network, other networks. He has a daily listing with categories so you can look up speakers and subjects and old sessions of Humanity Rising, and has been doing it faithfully since almost the beginning. And the task is getting a little heavy on his shoulders. And so we want to just simply reach out to all of you who may be watching today, so that any of you who would be willing to help Stan out, just either email me at Jim Garrison at ubiquityuniversity.org. Or Stan, what's your email address? You have to unmute.
Stan at othernetworks.org.
Yeah, that's probably best. Stan at othernetworks.org for direct contact with Stan, but you can also talk to me. Stan, could you just take a moment and just say what you're looking for?
Well, all the episodes have keywords that help to understand them. And it would be useful for people to put those keywords into my system. I have my own methodology for keeping the contents and organizing it so that it starts off with about a dozen top-level categories, and then there are thousands of subcategories underneath those top 15 or so. And I'll be happy to work with anybody who wants to understand how we have categorized and organized the 1,000 or so episodes of Humanity Rising. And I do start with day one with Jane Goodall, which is what attracted a lot of people to start watching Humanity Rising because of her fame and people's love for her. So that's what started me. And then about into the second, third week of Humanity Rising, I was watching every day. And by day 60, I invited a bunch of people, 15 of whom showed up on day 60 to talk about what they had seen on the day. Now we called it an after party, and then we changed it to calling it the after chat. And,
well, good. Well, thank you so much, Stan. You're one of the heroes of Humanity Rising. So I just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge you, and also Shannon MacArthur, who with you organizes and moderates the after chat. And we're going to do everything we can to support you. So again, it's Stan at othernetworks.org or Jim at ubiquityuniversity.org as well, for any of you who would like to contribute to Humanity Rising by assisting in the ongoing categorization of our sessions. So thank you, Stan.
one more thing, I would love for some people to write commentary. What did they feel because they watched today's episode? And send that to me, and I'll add it to my daily messages. What did they feel? What caused them to think?
Great.
Because they
Thank you, Stan. Thank you, Stan. Now let's turn everyone to the subject at hand, and that is the phenomenon of aging. Stan, you might want to turn off your video and put yourself back on mute. Stan's in the green room every day. We want to turn now to a deep mystery, and that is the mystery of aging and dying. Something that all of us, particularly as we enter into our middle and elder years, become preoccupied with our health, our vitality in the face of our mortality. It is a great mystery. We see life burgeoning all around us, and everything that we see, from a flower to a bug to a whale, to a solar system to galaxies. Everything lives and everything dies. And the great question that has preoccupied people from time immemorial and across all cultures and spiritual and religious traditions is whether death, which awaits us all, is the finality, or is death itself a portal to a new incarnation, a new life? And if it is, does our identity, does our ego, as it were, have the strength to traverse the death barrier and move into the next incarnation in a way that remembers the incarnation on this side of that great doorway? And that has led to increasing preoccupation with the phenomenon of aging. Why does life age? How does it age? How do we hasten aging? Through our behavior, through our diet, through our attitudes. And how can we prolong our lives through changes of attitude, diet, exercise, and all the things that we do to give ourselves vitality? Well, today we're going to probe that with Josh Middledorf, who took a PhD in astrophysics at the University of Pennsylvania, and then kind of in the middle of his career, as it were, got very interested into the phenomenon of aging, wrote a very well-received book, has a website, agingadvice.com. And I've gotten to know Josh over the last several months here in Washington, D.C., and invited him to share with us a little bit about his background and his pathway from astrophysics to the aging phenomenon, and then to present to us in a PowerPoint presentation and discussion what it is that he's discovered about this deep, great mystery that confronts us all. So Josh, welcome to Humanity Rising, and I will turn the program over to you.
Hi, Jim.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
sir.
Gee, I'm prepared to talk about biology and not about metaphysics. And I agree completely that what you're talking about is maybe the most interesting question of all: what happens to us after death? And perhaps coincidentally, After School just posted a piece by Graham Hancock, one of my heroes, which I referenced in the chat just yesterday. He posted a video about the mysteries, and maybe another time I'd love to talk about it, but my expertise is, I don't know, can you have
Really
an
biology.
expertise? I'm talking about the biology of
Yeah, yeah.
aging, and it's from a strictly scientific point of view, not necessarily straight biology, but it's the let me see if I can get myself up here. It's what observational biology and evolutionary biology has to say about aging, and what are the implications of that once we change our minds about what it is that causes aging, where aging comes from. I think that has implications about what we can do to care for ourselves and stay young. And that's my topic for today. And at another time, I would love to talk about the deeper issues of heaven, reincarnation, souls. What's the relationship between consciousness and the physical body? And those are all fascinating questions, but well beyond what I prepared to talk about today. So let's see. You mentioned Stan. Stan is my introduction to Humanity Rising. I've known Stan for probably 40 years. He's a neighbor in Philadelphia, and he's the one who introduced me to Humanity Rising. So needless to say, I'm tickled pink after participating as an audience member in so many shows to actually be on stage today. It's exciting for me. So here's a brief summary of what I want to say. I'm going to be inclusive. I'm going to try to bring people in because of what I have to say might be hard to hear, hard to accept. It's not new information. It's it it disagrees with a lot of the things that you may have thought. Well, maybe I don't know. My sense of the people in this group is that you all take good care of yourselves. You're skeptical of the medical establishment. You believe in natural foods, herbal medicine, traditional healing modalities, all to the good. Now, I'm guessing that you don't distinguish anti-aging from general health. You might think that keeping yourself healthy is the same thing as optimizing your body for a long life. And this is where I do have something that I might add to your knowledge. Here's the key thing that I discovered 28 years ago that turned me away from astrophysics and said, all right, this is my new career. When we're young, the body is trying its best to keep itself healthy. We're evolved for fitness. That's the name of the game. So the best thing we can do is to work with the body, give it the support it needs, nutrition, staying away from toxins. But as we get older, the body is deliberately destroying itself. We are evolved to self-destruct on a schedule. This isn't a failure of the body. It's what we're designed to do. It is natural. So anything that we do in the way of natural foods or herbal medicines, it's not going to change that. There are, however, some ways that we can extend our life. We're going to have to interfere with the body's program of self-destruction. This is very different from keeping healthy when we're young. It's the opposite of natural. We're not working with the body anymore. We'd have to fight the body. At that point, if you have to choose between what's natural and what's going to keep yourself alive, what do you choose? And there you get into really deep questions. Is it selfish to want to live a long time? I don't know. Um, I'm making the choice to extend my life in the best way I know how, but not willing to do a lot of things that seem to me wrong to do that. There are social implications, which I'm not even prepared to begin to understand, to talk about. Maybe in the after chat, we'll bring that up. So what would happen if we have technologies that are available to make us live to 200 or 300 years? What happens if those technologies are so expensive that only a small number of people can afford them? What do we owe to the young people, we as the older generation? So here's an outline of what I want to say today. I'll offer you the evidence first. This is a radical idea. It's not mainstream science, although it's getting to be. How do we know that aging is a process of active self-destruction and not just the body wearing out? So I'll bring the evidence to bear. And then I'll talk about what that means for personal self-care and what an anti-aging program is in the light of what we know. And finally, I'll come to something that's really new in the last year, a breakthrough in anti-aging technology. They've been able to rejuvenate rats. Maybe we can translate that and rejuvenate humans. It's really making an old rat into a young rat. Can we do that with humans? And because this is a challenging subject, I would like to know my audience better. It's a way to bring you in and also to inform me who I'm talking to and where I'm starting from. I want to ask you some questions to put in the chat. This is who, before we get there, this is who I am. This is where you can find me. My book is on the left. 3 of my websites are on the right. Agingadvice.org is what you can do to stay young. Aging Matters blog is 12 years worth of archives discussing what was new at the time, discussing my theory of aging. A lot of aging topics are there in the archive of that. Unauthorized Science is mostly about other things. It's about politics. It's about the relationship between science and spirituality. And that's my Substack site. I also wanted you to know that there's another side of me that is a yoga teacher, is a mystic, a Taoist, and my latest output is a cycle of sonnets based on the I Ching. And I have a website where you can actually consult the I Ching with art from my partner in this endeavor, Marilyn Butler, and poems from yours truly at iching, I-ching, iching.guru. And here's a sample page from there, just to know that there is another side of me. So I forgot about this slide. Yeah, so I'm not here to give you new information. I'm here to tell you that what you already know is wrong, I think. And that's why I'm going to great lengths to find out, well, where are you coming from? And what are your beliefs about aging? And what's the basis for that? So I'm going to start by asking you to put in the chat, what do you think aging is? In the deepest sense, where does aging come from? How does it work? And now I've got to see if I can find your chat so I can read your comments. Aging is the breakdown of the body over time. Thanks, Shannon. Life cycle. Aging is simply a part of that cycle. Aha. So these are two, I would say, opposite viewpoints. Aging is decay, everything falls apart, or aging is part of the biological program. And I see some people in each of those two camps. And it may not be obvious to you that they're really wrinkles and wisdom. Yay! Yay for wrinkles and wisdom. With the emphasis on the wisdom. Overeating, which is a topic that I'm going to come to later. So thank you for all of these things. I've got more questions I'm going to ask you in the chat. as well. So why do you think we age? What's the deepest reason for aging? Where does aging come from? Stress. Well, so I've got my work cut out for me. If you think stress is what causes aging, toxins. Yeah, so I'll have something to say about that in just a few minutes. Stem cells are an important component. Stem cells wear out, but why? Why would stem cells wear out? Um, why do stem cells have a limited lifespan? We come back to the natural cycle. I'm right there with you, Shannon. It is part of what nature has in mind for us. Yes to the programmed belief. Oh, now we here's the first reference to a religious view of aging. Our creator knows that humans must be recycled. And I'm not going to speak about that today. I respect it, but I'm talking from the perspective of biology, which may or may not relate in different ways to the religious view of aging. So I'm asking more of you. Why do insects age? Do you think that insects get old for the same reason that humans do? And they're interesting, you could call them anomalies. So all the bees in a beehive have the same genome. A worker bee lives for about 3 or 4 weeks. The queen bee has exactly the same genes, and they live for 5 years. There's also over the winter, the workers have nothing to do but to keep the queen alive. There's nothing to go out and forage about, but you still need workers to keep the queen fed and to keep the hive going. And those worker bees who are lucky enough to be born at the end of the summer, they live the entire winter. There are no new bees being born over the winter. So they live roughly half a year, whereas the summer worker bees live only a few weeks. There are other examples like this. Mice live for about 2 years. Bats are the same size as mice, but they're far more active. They burn more energy. Maybe they should wear out faster because of the toxic products from activity. Well, bats live 40 years, the same size as mice. Mice live only 2 years. You could say the same thing about rats and squirrels. Rats also live about 2 years. Squirrels are the same size as rats. They live 20 years. Pacific salmon, as you know, live about 5 years, and then they swim upstream, they lay their eggs, and they die. Atlantic salmon are a different breed of the same species. They're not identical, but very close genetically. And they swim upstream, they lay their eggs, and then they turn around and swim back downstream and go at it again. So why do the Pacific salmon die when the Atlantic salmon don't? So I'm looking at the chat about individual experiences. Yeah, certainly our individual experiences have something to do with how long we live. So one more question, which is going to lead you into how I got into this topic. Why does stress sometimes increase longevity? My introduction to this field was when I learned that when animals are starved, practically to the point where some of them are dying, the rest of the animals who somehow survive the starvation live much longer. If they're fruit flies, they live about twice as long. If they're mice, they live about 1.5 times as long when they're starved as when they have plenty to eat. We all know that exercise is good for us, but think about it. Exercise is a stress. The body is doing something that takes energy away from its other activities. Stress, the stress of exercise tears muscles, produces ROS, reactive oxygen species, like crazy. There's nothing like exercise to increase the oxygen burden on the body. And yet, the body lives longer when it's when we exercise. So you probably know these things, that eating less is good for longevity, that exercise is good for longevity. You might not know that there are other forms of stress that are also related to that also have a positive effect on longevity. Small doses of radiation, believe it or not. This has been found. It's not politically correct, but it happens to be true. Even some of the survivors of Hiroshima, still alive today, are having longer than usual lifespans because of low dose exposure to radioactivity, or higher doses, which they happen to survive. Certain toxins, not mercury or lead, but there are certain toxins like arsenic that when you're exposed in low doses, it makes you live longer. Some people say that the reason that cruciferous vegetables are good for us is the toxins that make cruciferous vegetables bitter, that are there to fight off insects. The vegetable produces chemicals to discourage insects or even to kill the insects. And these natural pesticides that are in the cruciferous vegetables contribute to our longevity. Well, what's that about? If you think about wearing out, this makes no sense at all. My theory is that aging is part of a grand program of population control to make sure that the population doesn't grow too fast when times are good, so that it doesn't crash too hard when a famine or an epidemic arrives. So from that perspective, it makes sense that when starvation is prevalent in the community, then aging looks at that and says, oh, well, everybody is dying of something else. They're dying of starvation. Death can take a vacation at this point. We don't need aging for self-destruction. We've got starvation. So aging takes a vacation when in times of famine. And when you eat less, you're convincing yourself that you're convincing your body that starvation is in the air. So thank you for your chats. And I'm going to move on to what it was that I had programmed to say, informed by what you're telling me you already believe, which seems to me healthily diverse. I believe people, I believe in diverse points of view, and it all gets expressed, especially in a time when freedom of speech is being attacked these days. So this is part one as promised. What is the evidence? How do we know that aging is self-destruction? The first is just how widely lifespans vary with no seeming reference to a biological necessity. Um, I mentioned the example of mice and bats. There are clams that live for hundreds of years. There are more complex animals, sharks and whales, that live for hundreds of years. Better known are turtles that live, I think the maximum is 200 or 300 years for turtles. And then at the other end, there are single-celled organisms that live for hours. There are many insects that live for a day. Mayflies live for a day. the 17-year locusts that were out this spring are another classic example. They live underground for 17 years, and then they come out, they lay their eggs, and they die. It seems pretty clear from examples like that that aging is not necessary, that life is doing something unnecessarily destructive to cause life to end. The salmon in the Pacific, what's killing them is glucocorticoids, these hormones that flood out and poison the animal. And there's a smaller dose of glucocorticoids. So glucocorticoids are stress hormones. And while you're fighting the current going upstream, it's useful to have them. And yet the overdose just kills the fish. There's less of an overdose in Atlantic salmon. Look, a couple of other interesting examples of what's called semal parity, death right after reproduction. Octopuses live for just 1 or 2 years, some live up to 5 years, and then they lay their eggs. After they lay their eggs, the mouth closes over. They don't have a mouth. They can't eat anymore after they lay the eggs. The female, the male just dies. The female stands guard over the eggs and protects the eggs from predators and swishes the water around the mice, around the eggs to bring nutrients. And the female lives until the last egg hatches, and then the female dies. In cold water, this can be several years before the last egg hatches, and the female is just sitting there waiting. It seems pretty clear from the example that the octopus is dying on a schedule. Another favorite example of mine is elephants. Elephants live about as long as humans, 60, 70, sometimes 80 years. And what happens to them at the end of their life? They're huge animals, as you know. They eat enormous quantities of roughage, I mean, things that we would call trees. They chomp down and chew, which is enormous wear and tear on their teeth. So we have 2 sets of teeth, our baby teeth and our adult teeth. Elephants have 6 sets of teeth throughout their lifetime. They wear their teeth out after a few years, and they grew a new set of teeth. But after the 6th set of teeth, there is no 7th set. And old elephants die of starvation. They can't eat anymore because their last set of teeth is gone. Now, has evolution been able to produce 6 sets of teeth, but unable to produce 7 sets of teeth? I don't know. That seems improbable to me. So all this is part of the first reason that we know that aging and death are programmed into our biology. The second is this word hormesis, which I've talked about, we've mentioned, but I haven't defined. Hormesis is a well-documented phenomenon, although it's controversial. The body lives longer when it's challenged with stress. Now think about this. If the body is challenged, it makes sense that, of course, the body adapts to that challenge. And we'd expect that the body would do better than if it hadn't adapted. But hormesis is more than this. The body overcompensates so that it actually does better when it's stressed than when it's not stressed. And it makes you wonder, if the body can live longer when it's starved, whatever it's doing, why doesn't the body do that when it's not starved? There's nothing that the body is capable of doing when it's really short of nutrients that it couldn't do if it wanted to when it was fully fed. This was actually my first key when in 1996, an article came out about caloric restriction. It was in Scientific American, and I looked at that. I'd been eating plenty of nutritious natural food all my life. And here I read this article that says the less you eat, the longer you live. And that this is not just about humans. Many animals in the laboratory, their lives have been extended by underfeeding them. This was my clue. The first that I realized this means that aging must be on purpose. It must be an adaptation. If most animals live longer when they're underfed, then there must be something in common. There must be a common evolutionary mechanism that leads to the body living shorter when it has plenty of food. I wouldn't say living longer when it's underfed. I mean, that there are too many ways you can talk around that. But why should the body live shorter when why should the body live shorter when it has plenty to eat? That was the original impetus that got me into this field, that made me realize um, that there's something here that's not easy to understand. I'm going to divert for a couple of minutes to tell you my history. So what happened? 1996, I read this article and I thought, gee, this must mean that aging is an evolved adaptation. Evolution wants us to die. This is 1996. Spam hasn't been invented yet. We have an internet. We don't have a World Wide Web. Um, and email is mostly for academics. So there's an email listserv for evolutionary biologists all over the world. And I posted my ideas about aging to this listserv, thousands of evolutionary biologists. And of course, if you did that today, it would just be deleted and you wouldn't get any response at all. But this is in the days before spam. So I got dozens of answers back to my naive theory of aging. And they said, you don't understand anything about aging at all. What you say can't be true. It requires group selection. And group selection isn't the way um, evolution works. Evolution is only about individual selection. I didn't know why aging would require group selection. I didn't know why individual selection was more powerful than group selection. I thought, I need to understand this. I went back to school in evolutionary biology, not formally, but I started taking courses in evolution at my local university, University of Pennsylvania. And I studied for a year evolutionary biology, reading papers and going to classes before I had a sense of this is why evolutionary biologists think the way they do. And this is why aging is a conundrum and why they believe that aging can't possibly be an adaptation. Aging is good for the community, but it's bad for the individual. And there are beliefs in the evolutionary community which are weakening now, but they were very strong in 1996. So there's no such thing as evolution for the sake of the community. There's only evolution for the sake of the individual. It's called the selfish gene theory, um, popularized by Richard Dawkins, but it's actually the work of Richard Fisher, R.A. Fisher, going back 100 years ago. So this is the dogma of evolutionary biology, that evolution cares nothing for the community, only cares for the individual. And I got into this field to understand why that's not true and to explain it to others and to understand the implications for aging. So there's a little piece of my history. I'm going to move on to the next thing on this list. Aging genes, what does that mean? An aging gene I would define as any gene that if you remove it with genetic engineering or if you block it using biochemical techniques that they have, the animal lives longer. The first example was DAF2. It's a gene in lab worms discovered in 1993 by Cynthia Kenyon. She disabled this gene, and lo and behold, the worms lived twice as long without the gene as with it. So what do you call that but an aging gene? That gene is there to shorten the lifespan. And according to standard evolutionary theory, that shouldn't be possible. There are aging genes in lab worms, in fruit flies, in rodents, presumably in humans as well, although we can't do the gene editing experiments in humans. I mean, you won't get very many volunteers to have their genome modified to see whether they're actually going to live a long time. But we're confident that there are aging genes in humans as well. And the kicker here is that these same aging genes, they didn't just arrive yesterday. These genes have been guarded like the crown jewels by evolution. They've been conserved over evolutionary time. We know that because it's the same damn genes that cause a yeast cell or a worm to die. The same genes are active in higher organisms and in mammals and including humans. What is that gene? I talked about DAF2 that they discovered first in worms, that you disable the gene, it makes the worm live longer. That is, they've discovered the insulin receptor. Whoa, insulin in a worm? I thought insulin was about keeping your blood sugar down, regulating blood sugar. Isn't that what insulin is for? Worms don't have any blood sugar. They don't even have any blood. Why do worms have insulin? So this is discovered in the last 30 years. Insulin has a long history going back to single-celled animals. Insulin regulates lifespan, and it has long regulated lifespan for 1 billion years. Insulin has been a hormone which cuts life short. And only in the last, only in the last 100 million years, when there are animals with blood sugar, insulin is also a hormone which regulates blood sugar. But its first and original use and its applicability in mammals, including humans today, is that insulin regulates lifespan. So I'm going to say, by the time we get to the next slide, that keeping your insulin down is probably one of the best strategies for living a long time. There are other genes as well that have been conserved since the beginning of evolutionary time, the same over wide ranges of species that shorten lifespan. And this is something that traditional evolutionary biology just can't explain. If a gene is essential for your metabolism, genes that control the sugar metabolism, for example, genes that copy DNA, genes that transcribe DNA, these are part of pathways that originated very early in biology. And of course, evolution is not going to mess with them because they're so important. Messing with them can affect everything. So these genes have been conserved over billions of years so that life has been on the planet. But aging, why should aging be in that same category of conserved genes? It looks like aging is being treated by evolution as an essential biological function, like copying DNA, like transcribing genes. That aging has been considered by evolution to be so important that it's conserved over, the genes for aging have been conserved over evolutionary time. The last thing on this list is epigenetic clocks. What is an epigenetic clock? I have a colleague and friend at UCLA now at a startup, biotech startup in London, but formerly at UCLA. He was a biostatistician, and he conceived the idea that you could make an aging clock out of gene expression. In other words, you could do a blood test that measures which genes are turned on, which genes are turned off over time. So just a little bit of background, you may or may not know, you have the same genes in every cell in your body. You have the same genes when you're born as when you die. The genes don't change, but the gene expression changes. Most of your DNA is not about genes, it's about regulating when and where genes get turned on. And there are markers on the DNA that determine that turn genes on and off in certain places and at certain times. So some of these genes being turned on have to do with age. And this is what my colleague, Steve Hormone, was counting on. He sifted through many thousands of sites on the DNA and found a few hundred that change most consistently with age. And he made a computer program that uses these 353 genes. And it's not, I misspoke, 353 sites. It's actually single nucleotides on the DNA that become methylated or not. Methylation is a marker that controls whether the gene is turned on. Some genes get turned on with age, some genes get turned off with age. And he used a combination of genes that are turned on and turned off, but those that vary most consistently over a lifetime. And he made what's called a biological clock that can determine your biological age, independent of your physical age, independent of how you look or how you feel or when your birthday is. You can undergo a blood test that looks at which genes are turned on and will tell you your age accurate to a few years. So I got in touch with the guy at the time, realizing that this is an important piece of the puzzle for me. I'm trying to convince people that aging is an adaptation, is something that the body does to itself. Well, turning genes on and off is certainly something that evolution cares a lot about. There's a lot of regulation about which genes get turned on where and when. After all, you don't want the same genes turned on in a liver cell as turned on in a skin cell or a blood cell. They need different chemistry, so they need different genes turned on. Epigenetics, which genes are turned on, is highly regulated by the body. And the fact that this is happening consistently over the lifetime means that self-destruction is part of the epigenetic program. Aging works. I now believe that aging works primarily through epigenetics, through turning on genes that destroy us. Suicide genes are switched on as we get older. So that's my case. I don't know whether I've convinced you or not. We can talk in the after chat about whether you find this convincing, but it's a lot to take in. And if you follow me this far and you believe that aging is a function of the body, it's not the body wearing out, it's something the body does to itself, then what are the implications for a personal anti-aging program? Well, my anti-aging program has 4 tiers. Start with tier 0 is everything that you're already doing, and you're probably doing it just right. Functional medicine is very popular, I think, among people who subscribe to this, to Humanity Rising. Natural foods, you get all the essential nutrients, and you give the body the food that it was evolved to handle. You avoid toxins and chemicals that are of modern origin. The body is just not evolutionarily prepared for them. Of course, you avoid smoking, avoid immoderate alcohol use, stay away from motorcycles, wear a seatbelt, minimize prescription drugs, use herbs and natural supplements that provide optimum support for the body's function. This is a good foundation for health. This is all tier 0 stuff, and it will assure you a healthy body when you're young, and it will maximize your chance of living the full lifespan for which your body is programmed, maybe 80 years. It may differ by a decade or so, depending on your particular genes. So moving on from tier 0, what can you do knowing that aging is self-destruction? So tier 1 is based on hormesis. We do have a program that determines our lifespan, but it's a flexible program. There's plasticity built into the aging program, depending on whether the environment is perceived as cushy, then your evolutionary strategy is just have as many babies as possible and then die. Or the body or the environment is challenging. You have to work harder, your food is scarce, and then a different life program uh, comes into play. Instead of having a lot of children quickly, you live longer, have the opportunity of having children later in life, because evolution perceives that this is really hard times. It's not a good time to bring children into the world. But maybe if we live out this famine or whatever it is, then we will be among the few who survive, and this will be really good for our genes. Our genes will seed the next generation. So clearly, evolution has optimized for this eventuality, and we're exploiting the flexibility that's built into the aging program to lengthen our life by a few years. We talked about eating less, trick the body into thinking that you're starving. Intermittent fasting, fasting for a few days at a time, for a few hours a day, keeps your insulin down, and it tricks the body into turning on this extra longevity program through hormesis. Exercise, again, is a form of hormesis which increases your lifespan. The best forms of exercise for longevity are the intense forms, sprinting. Just get yourself really out of breath for 1 minute. At the end of 1 minute, maybe you just feel like you can't go on any longer and you're panting and panting to recover. That's some of the best kind of exercise that you can do. Strength training is really important, especially as we get older. We're losing muscle mass, and lifting weights, doing resistance training, push-ups, pull-ups is the kind of exercise that keeps your muscle mass when our muscle cells are dying. These are all hormetic ways of exploiting the flexibility in the aging program to live longer. Lesser known ones are hot and cold. Saunas. It's been discovered just in the last decade that people who take saunas regularly have about 1/3 of the cardiovascular events, 1/3 of the risk of heart attack if you take a sauna 4 times a week for 20 minutes. This is a study out of Finland. So heat stress can also increase lifespan. You may have heard of Wim Hof, the Iceman from Netherlands, who is promoting a program of stress with breathing exercise and ice baths. that also increases fitness, and it hasn't been tested for longevity, but my bet would be that it does increase longevity. The Wim Hof program that you could probably find online if you're interested. I mentioned low dose radiation, which is a hard one for, I'm a lifelong anti-nuclear advocate. It's hard for me to accept, but it seems to be true that low dose radiation actually increases your lifespan, and certain toxins, as I mentioned. But the main hormetic strategies for extending your life are eating less, intermittent fasting, and exercise, and everything else is probably less powerful than those things. I should mention social factors here too. The body is so we're evolved as social creatures, despite what the selfish gene has to say. There are adaptations for the good of the community that are built into our genes, not just for the good of the individual. And individuals who are important to the community, somehow evolution knows that and extends our lifespans. If you're engaged and socially active, if you have loving relationships with your family, if you're empowered in your daily life, it leads to a kind of stress, but they call eustress. It's stress that's good for you. This is another kind of hormesis. Being engaged with your work, being engaged with your family, having people around who care about you and you care about them. This is it's worth 10 years of life, which is a huge amount. It's more than smoking. It's comparable to the amount of lifespan that you get by being by eating less. These social factors, living a life that's fulfilling and full of love. A lot of what you say about hormesis is it's just so hard to do the exhausting exercise and to starve yourself. Well, these social factors are rewarding while you're alive and also extend your life. Live a fully engaged life. Keep learning as long as you're alive. Keep engaging with the people you care about and be a leader in your community. It's worth, as I said, 10 years of life compared to being a depressed, isolated person. So we're done with 0 and 1. Number 2 is interfering with the self-destruction. There are 4 ways in which the body destroys itself with age. And each of those has a kind of antidote. The 4 ways are telomere aging, apoptosis, autoimmunity, and inflammation. So we'll go over those one by one. What are telomeres? Telomeres are repetitive DNA. It doesn't code for anything, but it's there as a buffer at the end of each of your chromosomes. And whenever the cell divides, the chromosome is copied and the telomere gets a little bit shorter. You may have read about it. At the end of every strand of DNA is a telomere. So what happens when the telomere gets short? Well, if it got too short, theoretically, then the cell would start losing the real coding DNA. But long before that, when the telomere gets critically short, the cell detects that and it goes into senescence. It becomes a senescent cell. This is a cell that not only ceases to function, will no longer divide, will no longer produce do its job wherever it is, whatever its job is in the body, but it becomes toxic. It sends out signals that cause other cells nearby to become senescence and increase inflammation. How can you counter this telomere aging, cell senescence? There are two strategies. One is that there's an enzyme called telomerase that actually extends your telomeres. I mean, there must be such an enzyme because we're all born with nice long telomeres. Usually, telomerase is only expressed in the fetus and in the egg stage, but you can turn on telomerase in your body with certain herbs, with certain practices. One of my favorite studies shows that meditation increases your telomerase. So finding strategies to turn on telomerase is one way to interfere with self-destruction. A second is to kill the cells that become senescence. This is called a senolytic herb, or a senolytic drug is one that kills your senescent cells while keeping the other cells alive. Quercetin, you may have heard of quercetin as a common supplement. It's another one called fisetin, which is a variant of quercetin. And these seem to kill senescent cells preferentially. There are more powerful drugs that do that, but they're toxic to the rest of our cells, and I don't want to mess with them. Fasting is also senolytic. It kills preferentially the cells that you don't need. So two strategies to stop cell senescence. One is telomerase, and the other is senolytics. Moving on to the second way that the body is destroying itself is autoimmunity. Autoimmunity, you have an immune system and it has to distinguish your cells, and certainly don't attack my cells. But there are invading cells, bacteria, or it happens with organ transplants that the body detects this is foreign tissue and the immune system attacks it. So the body's immune system is highly trained to tell which is self and which is other. Your white blood cells do the job, and they're trained in the thymus. They're called T cells because they're named for the thymus where these cells are trained. Thymus is in the throat, in the base of your neck. It's a tiny organ, and it becomes smaller and smaller and less active with age. So it's your shrinking thymus that is the root cause of the self-destruction through autoimmunity. How can we regrow the thymus? A colleague of mine has a program that does that with his protocol of cocktail of 5 ingredients. They're HGH, human growth hormone, DHEA, metformin, vitamin D, and zinc are his 5 ingredients for regrowing your thymus. There's an enzyme called FOXN1, which if you could get it into your system, it really would do the job well, but you can't digest FOXN1. It's hard. If you could get FOXN1 into the body, it would do the best job of regrowing the thymus. This is on the cutting edge of, we don't know how to do that yet. Number 3 in the methods of self-destruction, we had shorting telomeres, we had autoimmunity. The third is apoptosis. So apoptosis is the scientific name for programmed cell death. And we need apoptosis. We need some cells to die. When you're in the womb, your hand grows as a web. You have webbed fingers, and all those, the webbing between your fingers dies off. The program's the program of apoptosis is used to kill the webs and leave the fingers behind. We need it all through our life because if a cell becomes cancerous, then it needs to detect that, and the cell knocks itself out. It falls on its sword for the sake of the rest of the body. When a cell is infested with a virus, the cell detects that it's infected, it's a threat to the rest of the body, and the cell will commit suicide using this process of apoptosis. So apoptosis is essential. We don't want to turn apoptosis off completely. But as we get older, apoptosis is on a hair trigger, and we find perfectly good muscle cells killing themselves, just getting out of the way. And we lose muscle cells. It's called sarcopenia because of apoptosis. Worse, we're losing our brain cells because of apoptosis. Yes, the nerves in our brain cells, the nerve cells in our brains are dying. They're just self-destructing over time. I think hundreds of thousands of them every day, maybe millions of them every day. We're losing a lot of brain cells, and it's through apoptosis. This is a tough one. I don't know how to interfere with this one. There are not good remedies that I know of that restore the cell's intelligence about when to stay alive and when to die. There are herbs that can regrow brain cells. Some of my favorite are bacopa and lion's mane mushroom. Weight-bearing exercise and resistance training, as I said, the best ways to maintain muscle mass. And heart cells are also dying. You increase your cardiovascular fitness by keeping those cells alive by exercising your heart with aerobic exercise. There are some studies that show that creatine in conjunction with exercise is helpful. There are hormone treatments that that produce more growth, can combat apoptosis, but I'm not sure that they have side effects, and I'm not pushing them because we don't know enough about them yet. The last and most important of these ways that the body self-destructs is inflammation. And maybe you've heard about inflammation. It's a key ingredient in all of the important diseases of old age: heart disease, stroke, Alzheimer's disease, and cancer are all closely related to inflammation. Inflammation in the arteries is really the root cause of heart disease. It's not cholesterol. Inflammation in the brain is closely related to Alzheimer's disease. Inflamed cells are much more likely to become cancerous. Again, inflammation is a primary self-defense of the body. We don't want to get rid of inflammation because inflammation is an essential defense. If you cut yourself, you want inflammation to kill the damaged cells. You want inflammation there to destroy the bacteria that come in through your cut. But as we get older, the body becomes chronically and systemically inflamed. Inflammation is everywhere. And it's that chronic inflammation that we want to interfere with. So the best thing that you can do in this category is to take anti-inflammatory herbs and anti-inflammatory drugs. Aspirin is very old. Aspirin extends lifespan in test animals, and it's been it was recommended by the straight medical community for decades. They stopped recommending it a few years ago. I'm really suspicious of that. I think they're wrong. That aspirin is still a daily quarter aspirin at bedtime is still a good health strategy. Curcumin is the active ingredient in turmeric, the Indian spice, and it's an important anti-inflammatory. Fish oil or krill oil or vegetarian oils from algae contain omega-3 fatty acids, which are some of the best anti-inflammatory agents that you can find. And boswellia is the scientific name for frankincense. And that's the fourth anti-inflammatory supplement that I recommend. Aspirin, curcumin, fish oil, and boswellia are the best anti-inflammatory supplements that you can take. Believe it or not, exercise is anti-inflammatory. Fasting is anti-inflammatory. So there's overlap between these strategies. That's number two, interfering with self-destruction. We're moving on to number three, hacking the aging code. Can you actually get underneath how the body communicates how old it is and hack into that code? And then you can really getting into the root of aging, decode the biochemistry that tells the body to turn on these aging programs and just give it a different message. And this is the cutting edge of aging research today. Can we do that? The beginning of the research that led to this was this couple. This is Mike and Irina Conboy. They were grad students in the laboratory of Tom Rando in Stanford in 2004. Irina was a young student from Russia, and she brought over this idea of research by tying two mice together. You can abrade the body of each mouse and then surgically join them together. Their blood supplies merge. So these two mice are surgically joined together and they share one blood supply. You do this with one old mouse and one young mouse. It's called heterochronic parabiosis. Big word. Parabiosis is just joining the two mice together. Heterochronic just means they're different ages. So you tie a young mouse and an old mouse together. So they're sharing a blood supply, but they're not sharing anything else. It's just the blood. And you find that the old mouse shows signs of getting younger. It heals better, and some of the signs of aging in the old mouse reverse. The young mouse, meanwhile, is aging at a much more rapid rate. The old mouse, the young mouse is getting older, the old mouse is getting younger. So from these experiments in 2004 at Stanford, they conclude, well, there's something in the blood that's communicating information about age to the body. Aging is not something that happens cell by cell. The cells have to be told, you're in the cell of a 20-year-old person. Act like it. Be robust and strong. You're in the cell of a 75-year-old person. Time to bow out. Maybe don't do your job as well. Maybe become senescent. Cells take their instructions from these signals in the blood. And it's the parabiosis experiments that really convinced the community that this was something to take seriously. So the race is on. What is it in the blood that is sending the signals about age throughout the body? Well, they were able to filter out blood cells and realize that it's not the blood cells. It's in the blood plasma, which is just the water that's left over and everything dissolved in the water. It's not the blood cells. It's something else in the blood plasma that's the carrier of age information. Well, the Conboys continued their research. They went on to have their own lab where they're at Berkeley now. And there's another student from that lab who's gone on to Stanford, from Stanford to Harvard, and her name is Amy Wagers, also doing this kind of research. What is it in the blood that's transmitting information about age through the body? The breakthrough came just a few years ago. My colleague, Harold Katcher, who's pictured here, made an inspired guess that the carrier of age information in blood plasma was exosomes. He made this guess. He didn't have any. He was a retired professor and didn't have any funding for a laboratory, but he found an Indian entrepreneur who had just enough money to get him going. I think he started on less than $100,000, which is $100,000 will fund a lab experiment with a couple of dozen rats. If you're in Mumbai, you certainly can't do that in America. So Harold went to Mumbai. He did this experiment, and it worked swimmingly. Immediate and dramatic results in making old rats into young rats. They looked younger, they acted younger, they lived longer, they learned faster. All of the biological markers of aging were restored to youthful values. So I mentioned the epigenetic clock that Horvath developed. So Katcher goes to Horvath and says, are my rats really younger according to the Horvath clock? And Horvath says, well, I don't know. We've got a clock that works for humans. We don't have a clock for rats. So together, Horvath and Katcher developed an aging clock for humans that also works for rats. It's a two species aging clock based on epigenetics. And son of a gun, the treated rats started out with a biological age of 2 years. At the end of the treatment, they had the body of a 1-year-old rat, or the epigenetics of a 1-year-old rat. And this was a breakthrough that I was really excited about a few years ago. But then there was a kerfluffle over intellectual property, and the man who put up the money for Katcher's research didn't want the secret divulged. Well, what is it in the blood? So it remained secret for a long time until last summer. A group in UC in Los Angeles, the Smith Heart Institute in Los Angeles, published dramatic results using exosomes to rejuvenate rat hearts. And at that point, Katcher's partner's hand was forced. Somebody else is coming out with a study, and he revealed to me, yes, that the secret that Katcher knew all along but wasn't revealing is exosomes. Exosomes are the element in the blood that communicates information about age. So what's an exosome? Well, it's a lipid nanoparticle, became infamous during the COVID era, a lipid nanoparticle, but these are natural particles. They're little droplets of fat. Because they're fat, they go right through the cell membrane, which is made of fat. And inside the droplet of fat are signal molecules, snippets of DNA, RNA, and proteins, hormones that coordinate a set of signals through the body. Our cells, all eukaryotic cells, are excreting exosomes all the time, and also taking exosomes in. They seem to be a universal communication mechanism, communicating all kinds of things. If you have a new disease, if you're fighting off a disease in your body, then your immune system will drop exosomes into your breath. You'll breathe them out. I wasn't exposed to that disease, but I breathe in your exosomes. My immune system takes in your exosomes and learns from the exosomes that you're breathing out, hey, there's the new virus in the air. I better start getting my immune system ready for it. This, by the way, is part of the reason why isolating people, shutting down society, and keeping people at home during COVID was exactly the wrong strategy. We needed to be sharing our exosomes with each other to spread immunity to the new virus through the community. But whether it was deliberate or whether it was just a huge mistake, we were locked down and we were no longer sharing exosomes during COVID, the early part of COVID. Just an aside. So trees in a forest emit exosomes for the same reason. If there's an invading insect, the first invaded trees will produce exosomes with the information about who the invader is, what chemicals you need to create to fight the invader. And the other trees, they might be the same species, they might be completely different species. They pick up this information from the exosomes in the air. And their defense mechanisms go to school on the exosomes. So exosomes cross species, but even more important are the role of exosomes within the body. We know that exosomes carry all kinds of information through the blood. Cells communicate with each other through exosomes. It's a whole new science that we're just beginning to learn about. But the part that we're most interested in for our purposes is that exosomes seem to be the vehicle that communicates age through the body. And what Harold Katcher was doing in Mumbai was harvesting exosomes, not from young rats, but from young pigs, and using the exosomes from young pigs to rejuvenate old rats. So this was really important. Exosomes cross species barriers. They're not excluded by the immune system, and the same signals are used clearly in pigs and in rats, and we might hope that they work in the same exosomes from animals can be used in humans too. This is the way that's the cutting edge research, how we hack into the body's program, the body's language, that is speaking the word old or young to the cells in the body using these exosomes. And it's the most promising anti-aging technology that's on the horizon now. It works in animals. Can we translate it to humans? There are people jumping the gun. There's a clinic in Palo Alto run by Dobry Kiprov in conjunction with the Convoys, who I mentioned earlier. And their idea is to get the old exosomes out of your body. They do this with a process called plasmapheresis, which has been in use for decades for other purposes. Plasmapheresis, you sit in a chair, you've got a needle in each arm. The needle that comes out of your right arm takes your blood out, and it goes into a machine. It spins the blood down, separates the blood plasma from the blood cells. And in your left arm, the blood cells come back into you, but without the plasma. As you removing your plasma is plasmapheresis, and the plasma is replaced with something called albumin, and ordinary salt water, saline solution, is put back in your left arm. And I know people who have had this done. Some of them say, yeah, this is the best thing that's ever happened to me. I feel younger all the time. And others say, well, I wasn't sure I got any benefit from this at all. And it's kind of expensive. But this is just removing the old exosomes, and it does nothing to bring in new exosomes. There are other clinics, I know two of them in Texas, that will give you blood plasma that they buy from healthy young donors. So you can get plasma, whole plasma, not just exosomes. So the fact that you're getting whole plasma limits the amount of exosomes that you can get in. And again, there are some people who swear by it. They say this is making them younger. This is brand new in the last couple of years that there are clinics doing this. Transmitting whole blood plasma from young donors to old people who want rejuvenation. So this is where we are. Obviously, maybe obvious to you, taking out the old exosomes with putting in the young exosomes is probably the best strategy going forward. But we don't have good techniques for extracting exosomes yet. We don't know if pig exosomes can be used. We don't have industrial scale. laboratory techniques for creating exosomes in large quantities, extracting exosomes from young cells in large quantities. There are proposals to do this with stem cells. You can harvest stem cells from umbilical cords or placental matter and grow the cells in a lab. Maybe this could be done with human cells. Maybe we would do it with pigs' blood. Millions of pigs are slaughtered every day and their blood is just thrown away. All this is research that's just waiting to be done. It's an exciting and a chaotic stage of research in anti-aging. We think we have something that's revolutionary, but there's a lot of routine lab work and a lot of industrial engineering before it's ready for testing in humans. There are companies eager to make money by bringing this to the clinic, probably before it's ready. But I don't know anybody who's willing to put up money for the basic research that we need. And it's not a whole lot. It's, you know, $50 million. I'm guessing something in the range of $50 million to do all the research that we need to bring this to bring it from the laboratory into human trials. And the problem is that you can invest all that money, do all the research, and then somebody else sells there's no intellectual property here is the problem. You can't patent exosomes because they're a natural substance. And how are you going to make money on this? I've been trying to sell this idea. Every conference that I go to this year, I try to sell it. I don't have any takers so far, people willing to invest in this. So that's my story, and eager to open this up to you at this point. And you hear what Jim has to say and what the rest of you have to say if you have questions or discussion.
Thank you, Josh. We're running pretty close to time. So I think what we'll do is bring this session to a close so that we can go immediately to the after chat. So we can just have a longer, more extended discussion.
Sounds good to me.
I must say, I find what you've been saying very commonsensical about the inevitability of aging and the body processes and how one can work on them. So I really appreciate it and would love to have you back down the trail as you gather more research, particularly on this pheresis therapy that I'd heard about, but I didn't know about it in the context of how you're describing it. And so thank you for that. Thank you for that.
I'd be honored to return. You're right. There's much more to say.
And have you put your website in the link? Agingadvice.com. Oh, no, you're on mute.
Agingadvice.org. .com won't work.
Agingadvice.org.
Everything I do is nonprofit. I'm compromised in the area of money. I've never been able to hold down a job. I've never been able to get a grant. Everything I do is self-funded, and I have just enough family money that I can do this on my own, but not enough to fund the kind of research I would like to do. So everything I do is on my own. I'm a .org at every step of the way. I'm not making any money.
Yeah, good for you. Good for you. Yeah, I'm in the same situation, .org all the way. Keeps it simpler and cleaner and more noble, I think, in the end. So thank you so much, Josh, and thank you, everybody. This is an extraordinarily profound topic of aging, dying, rejuvenation, youthfulness. It's a great mystery, and we have yet to learn many, many things, and I'm sure we will over the next several decades of research and development. And Josh Middledorf is on the cutting edge of it, as you can see. You'll receive the link in the after chat. Josh is going to join the after chat. You also received the link to the after chat in the Zoom reminder. So if you're interested in a deeper dive with Josh on aging, and youthfulness, join the after chat. Okay, everyone, enjoy your weekend, and we'll see you here again on Monday. And just as a reminder, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday are going to be the final sessions of Humanity Rising before we break for the month of August, and we'll return on the 4th of September. Thanks, everyone. See you Monday. Thanks so much, Josh. Brilliant session. Bye for now.
Well, thank you, Jim. I'm honored to be here.
Yeah, bye for now.